Welcome home, ma'am. Nice to meet you, I'm Kristen. It was the day I returned home after being away for work for a week. There, an unknown woman was waiting for my return, smirking as if to provoke me. Upon closer inspection, the woman who introduced herself as Kristen had a noticeably swollen belly, apparently pregnant, and claimed that the father of the child was my husband, Steve. Since you hadn't come home for a while, I had Kristen come over. Her belly's big now, and I need to be with her because I'm worried. While I was away for work, my husband had brought his pregnant mistress home to live together. She's due soon, so you and Nicole need to leave this house quickly. We're getting a divorce. Steve said this coldly to me, laughing mockingly with a disdainful look in his eyes. Suddenly, after the mistress appeared, I was thoroughly fed up with my husband, who kept making selfish demands. I had been silent, but then I quietly spoke up. Hey, what have you been saying? We're already divorced. I started a new life with Nicole last week, and I'm a single mother now, you know? Yeah? Mom and I have been living alone in a brand new high-rise condo since last week, right? Despite our words, they seemed to think it was a joke and began to laugh heartily. What? What are you talking about? Did you hit your head or something? As they continued to laugh mockingly, the front door suddenly burst open, and a person appeared. Huh, what? Why? At that moment, seeing the unexpected visitor I had summoned, Steve and Kristen were trembling, frozen in shock and fear. My name is Diane. I am an office worker. I was born and raised in the countryside of Ohio and moved to New York to enter university. After graduating from university, I joined a major advertising agency, my first choice. I loved working at the advertising agency I had always admired, and even though it was busy, I was having fulfilling days. My colleagues all had high aspirations, and we worked hard together. I was blessed with a meaningful job and good relationships. Back then, I was very lively. While working at the advertising agency, I met Steve, who worked at a client company. Steve and I were close in age, and it didn't take long for us to get along. Steve was serious about his work, but upon deeper conversations, he was bright, had many interests, and was knowledgeable. Our conversations naturally flowed, and before I knew it, I began to be drawn to Steve. Looking back, Steve had a charm that attracted people. Seemingly interested in me, he suggested we have a meal together. After meeting a few times, we naturally developed a relationship. Since we both had a desire to marry, our talks progressed smoothly, and we got married a few years later. I continued to work after getting married, but I resigned from the company the following year when I became pregnant. Saying I had no regrets about quitting would be a lie. I loved my job and had planned to continue working even after getting married. However, having been promoted to a director, it was my duty to lead the team, and I couldn't hold everyone back. After completing a big project, I might have been suffering from burnout. With my first child on the way, I was anxious about balancing work and parenting. I decided to take a break from work for a while after getting pregnant and focus on raising my child. Steve agreed with my decision to quit. During our single days, I was busier than Steve, often coming home late. Steve didn't look pleased seeing me so busy. Internally, he probably didn't want me to work too much. After getting married, we rented a new house and started a new life. I gave birth safely, and our daughter Nicole was born. However, 6 months after Nicole's birth, we suddenly started living with my in-laws. Steve's parents lived close by, just the two of them, but they were much older than my parents and had chronic illnesses. Steve worried about his parents and suddenly proposed living together. I had never expected to live with my in-laws, as it had never come up before our marriage. I wasn't keen on the idea, but given the circumstances, I couldn't refuse, and we moved in with our in-laws with Nicole. After we started living together, I was busy taking care of Nicole and caring for my in-laws. At first, there wasn't much caregiving to do, but as they aged, their health worsened daily, and they could no longer cook or go out. I ended up taking care of everything around my in-laws, as their daughter-in-law. Steve, citing his busy work schedule, did nothing around the house and left all the household chores and caregiving to me. Balancing unfamiliar caregiving with parenting was overwhelming. I reached my limit and asked Steve for help. "Hey, Steve. It's about your parents. It's hard for me to take both of them to the hospital alone. Can you come with me?" I asked Steve for help, clearly at my limit. However, he never offered a hand. "If it's too hard to take both, just split it into 2 days and take one at a time. You're free every day anyway. Think about it. I'm busy with work." He thought I was free every day. Despite it being his own parents, he told me not to rely on him because he was working. I managed all the household chores alone, and if I ever slacked off, Steve would point it out. "Hey, dinner's ready-made today? You always try to take the easy way out." He began to complain about the meals I prepared. The kind Steve before marriage was no longer there. I felt like a housemaid in this house. Indeed, Steve seemed busy with work every day. There were times he came home late due to overtime, and he often brought work home. When he worked from home, he would become irritable if Nicole made noise, so I often had to ask Nicole to endure to avoid upsetting Steve. After working in his room, Steve would silently leave documents near me that he no longer needed. "Throw these away," he seemed to imply. I might have come to believe that he only sees me as a maid. That's how I felt. While living through such treatment, I was overwhelmed by a sense of emptiness daily, but without my involvement in housework, childcare, and caregiving, this household wouldn't function. My days were too hectic to even think about anything unnecessary. Then, one day, although it was a holiday, Steve seemed busy with work and stayed in his room. On such a beautiful day, I would have liked to take Nicole outside, but I couldn't leave my in-laws, who needed care. Moreover, since Nicole was born, there are hardly any memories of the three of us going out or traveling together. I felt terribly sorry for making Nicole endure so much from a young age. A few hours later, Steve came out of his room with a grumpy face, apparently having finished his work. When busy with work, Steve always became even more irritable. As usual, he silently dropped some unwanted documents in front of me, as if throwing them at my face. Does he think I'm a trash can or something? Fighting the urge to say something out of frustration, I gathered the papers. A few days later, Steve came home earlier from work than usual and approached me frantically, saying the first thing, "Hey. Where did you put those documents from the other day?" "Huh? The documents from the other day? The work documents you brought?" "I threw them out with the trash yesterday." Steve raised his voice so loudly that I responded in a small, surprised voice. "What have you done?" He yelled at me. "But, you always bring me documents to throw away. Weren't those supposed to be disposed of too? When did I ever say to throw them away? I never asked for that. Don't mess around." He yelled at me and stormed out of the room. Perhaps some important documents were mixed in with the ones to be thrown away. Unable to let it go, Steve went to his workroom and frantically started searching through the pile of documents. Blaming everything on me for his own mistake, he was angrily ranting. I was just stunned by being unilaterally blamed. Seeing such a side of Steve, my heart had completely detached from him. Triggered by this incident, Steve's tyrannical behavior escalated further. Anything unpleasant he said was irrational, and he blamed it all on me, his wife. If I made even a slight mistake, he exaggerated it and mocked me. "You really are useless. You don't work outside and don't contribute to society, so at least be useful for the family." He seemed to be using me as an outlet for his stress. Since we got married, Steve had come to look down on me. Nicole, growing up in this environment, sensed Steve's attitude and grew to despise him as she entered her teenage years. It might be common for teenage girls to dislike their fathers, but Nicole's disdain was unusually intense. And for good reason. Steve had never done anything father-like since Nicole was born. Usually not conversing much, Nicole sometimes spoke up, unable to bear Steve's one-sided verbal abuse. Steve was also displeased with Nicole's rebellious attitude, directing all his anger towards me. It's because of your poor upbringing that Nicole acts this way towards her parents. A daughter is just a nuisance. It's your fault for not giving me a male heir. If you can't give me an heir, you're just like a maid. He mocked me. For Steve, anything inconvenient for him was my fault. Was it my fault too, that we didn't have a son? And perhaps Steve really did see me only as a maid. Hearing his words, I was convinced of it. High school student Nicole had been busy with her high school life, joining the basketball team she had been part of since elementary school. She was in a school renowned for basketball and had earned a regular spot on the team. Busy with practices, camps, and tournaments, Nicole often was away from home. It was probably better for her to be engrossed in something else than to be at such a home. I silently supported Nicole, who was working hard. I would do anything I could to support her. At the same time, I envied Nicole for having something she was passionate about. I wished for a place outside the home where I belonged. I wanted something to devote myself to. Watching Nicole, I started to think about these things. At that time, I was fortunately invited to dinner by a former colleague. I still kept in touch with my colleagues from the advertising agency, and we gathered frequently. Talking with friends allowed me to forget about home and enjoy myself. Over the years, some had left the old company, while others had been promoted. Everyone had followed their own paths, but remained lively and active as ever. During dinner, I shared my current situation and consulted them about my future. I had been thinking about returning to work and wanted my old friends to encourage me. One of them mentioned they were looking for someone and wanted to hire me. The conditions were good, and I couldn't let this timing slip by. The deal was settled quickly. The biggest concern about returning to work had been my in-laws, but my former colleagues suggested I look into caregiving services. Following their advice, we arranged daycare services. Nicole was very happy about my returning to work. "Mom, you used to work hard before you got married, right? That's cool. You can do it, Mom. You've supported me a lot, so tell me anything I can do to help. Let's do our best together." She said so. With Nicole's support, despite the gap, I was able to engage with work as I had when I was single. The company I joined was a new one, only a few years old, and the workload per person was much more than before. Still, being entrusted with a responsible position from the start, I found the job fulfilling. I had found a new place for myself. When immersed in work, I could forget the terrible treatment from Steve and being treated like a maid. After joining the company, it soon entered a busy period. The work was more demanding than I had imagined, and I couldn't return home for about a week. It was the first time I had been away from home for so long. Although I was worried about home, being away allowed me to focus on work. Despite having been away for a whole week, Steve had not contacted me once. Steve only thinks of himself. He probably didn't worry about me. I returned home and unlocked the front door. To my surprise, I found women's shoes at the entrance that were neither mine nor Nicole's. My in-laws should have been at the facility during this time, but I sensed someone's presence inside. Feeling an odd sense of discomfort different from usual, I heard a man's voice, presumably Steve's, and an unfamiliar young woman's voice coming from inside. As I stood frozen in the entrance looking at the shoes, an unknown woman came out. Realizing I had returned, she smiled slyly and said, "Welcome home. Steve, the maid has returned." "Ah, you're back. It's been so long I almost forgot your face." Steve and the woman I had never seen before looked at me with smirking, malicious faces. "You didn't need to come back. Since you hadn't returned for a while, I had Kristen come over. Kristen is pregnant, and I need to be with her because I'm worried." Saying this, Steve gently stroked the woman's large belly. The woman was considerably younger than me or Steve, probably in her 20s. She had long brown curly hair, heavy makeup, and a strong perfume scent wafting around her. "Nice to meet you. I'm Kristen. I've been getting along well with Steve." Kristen greeted me provocatively. As I stared at her large belly, Kristen noticed my gaze and said, "Ah, as you can see, I'm pregnant. It's a boy." Saying this, she provocatively pushed her belly forward as if showing it off to me. "Of course, I'm the father. She's due soon. So you and Nicole need to pack your things and leave this house by then. We're getting a divorce. Steve has always said he wanted a son to carry on the family name. He was really happy when he found out I was pregnant and it's a boy. What a difference from you, who can't even bear a son. We have no more need for a maid like you." Steve and Kristen seemed to be enjoying themselves as they chattered away. "Hey, what's wrong? Too shocked to speak? Say something." Provoked by Steve, I, who had been silent all this while, quietly opened my mouth. "What are you two talking about? We're already divorced. I've been a single mother since last week, haven't I?" My unexpected words made Steve and Kristen pause for a moment with confused expressions, then they burst out laughing. "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? I understand you're trying to act tough, but come up with a better lie." Really, she's so confused, poor thing. The shock must have driven her crazy. "You were dumped by Steve. He chose me over you." Kristen looked triumphantly and peered into my face. At that moment, the front door swung open with force. Nicole, having finished her club activities, had come home just in time. It's true. She must have been listening to our conversation from outside the entrance. Nicole interrupted our conversation and shouted loudly, "What Mom is saying is true. After all, I've been starting a new life in a new high-rise condo with her since last week." "A high-rise condo? What's gotten into both of you? Did you dream this or something?" Steve still thought it was a joke as he listened to Nicole. I took out my smartphone from my bag and showed Steve a photo, saying, "This man is the president of the company I work for. You know him, right?" "Huh. This guy, isn't he the major client's president from our company? How did you get close to him? Someone like you, just an ordinary woman, shouldn't be able to approach him so easily. What did you do to get close to him?" Steve spoke as if I were some kind of swindler. I continued, "This man used to be a colleague of mine at the company I worked for. He started his own company a few years ago. He invited me to work with him, and I joined his company. You should know that his company is doing well, and thanks to that, I was able to move into the high-rise condo. But he's known for being difficult to deal with. Even our company took months to persuade him." "And you're working at his place? A woman like you with no particular skills? I might be a woman without merit to you, but there, I've been given a position and I work. Oh, by the way, the reason your company got a deal with ours is because I asked the president. He wasn't very keen on it, actually." "That can't be. It's a lie, right?" As I finished speaking, Steve looked as if he had been drained of spirit, his face pale. And next to him, Kristen looked even paler. Kristen had been silently listening to our conversation and now seemed about to collapse, all strength gone from her body. I said something to Kristen. "By the way, our president was happy about having a baby soon, but recently he started saying that he might not be the father. At first, it was just a suspicion, but recently he's become convinced and seems quite angry." "Huh? What are you talking about all of a sudden?" Steve looked puzzled, but Kristen started shaking, her face still pale. "Huh? Kristen? What's wrong, are you okay? Are you feeling sick?" "No. I'm fine. It's nothing." In a weak voice, Kristen replied, and I said loudly as if to deliver the final blow. "Kristen, you're the president's wife, aren't you?" What? What are you talking about? Stop it with the weird jokes. I've never seen this man before." As Kristen uttered these words, the front door swung open again. "So this was where you were?" The man entering from the entrance was the president of my company and Kristen's husband. He had suspected his wife, Kristen, of having an affair, and had figured out that Steve was the other man. Today, having heard that I was going back to the house to collect my things, the president said he would follow me later. He probably thought his wife and Steve would be there. You're the one who stole my wife. I know everything now. With that, the president furiously shouted at Steve. Overwhelmed by the president's imposing presence, Steve started to tremble. No, that's not it. I don't remember anything like that. Steve's behavior was unrecognizable compared to how he usually strutted around me. He looked down, unable to face the president, and trembled. Hey, Kristen. Explain yourself clearly. The president demanded an explanation from Kristen amidst his excitement. Kristen looked uncomfortable and faced downward, probably realizing there was no escaping the situation. With resignation, she took a deep breath and slowly started to speak. It was just for fun at first. I liked Steve's looks. Once we got involved, the physical chemistry was good, and I couldn't stay away. Hey. What are you saying? That's not it. I was just deceived by this woman. She seems to have other men too. I'm sure the baby isn't mine. If you check, you'll see. I'm not to blame. Thinking his position was getting worse, Steve suddenly distanced himself from Kristen. Steve has always had a good facade. He must have been nice to Kristen too, but his true nature emerged under pressure. How can you say you're not at fault after stealing someone else's wife? The president's anger escalated at the slander of his wife. It seemed like he might become violent if no one intervened. Eventually, the president took Kristen and left, likely deciding it was better for them to discuss things between themselves as a couple. After they left, Steve suddenly apologized to me, and unexpectedly, he asked me to reconsider our divorce. I was really just deceived. She blackmailed me, saying I had to take responsibility because she was pregnant. Even now, Steve was making excuses. Disgusted, I coldly shot back. It's too late to say such things now. The divorce papers have already been filed. The divorce is finalized. Huh? When did I write a divorce paper? Are you saying you forged it? That can't be valid. What are you talking about? It was written in your handwriting. It was among the documents you handed to me. I have proof. With that, I showed Steve the divorce paper I had photographed with my phone. Ever since Steve yelled at me for throwing away an important document, I had started checking the contents of the documents before disposing of them. One day, while checking as usual, I found a divorce paper that had already been filled out. He didn't remember it, but he likely wrote it during a drunken moment with Kristen. I had kept the divorce paper instead of disposing of it. I had been waiting for the right moment to submit it. Telling myself that someday I would submit this paper and be freed from this house, I had encouraged myself through the tough times. I had also consulted Nicole about the divorce in advance. To tell the truth, it was Nicole who first suggested the divorce. Nicole had seen me being verbally abused by Steve daily and was as distressed as I was. For Nicole's sake as well, divorcing seemed to be the best option. Seeing the photo of the divorce paper written in his own handwriting, Steve made a soundless voice as if some memories were coming back to him. Mom, I've packed everything. Let's go back to our place. While I was talking with Steve, Nicole came out of the room carrying her bags. By then, we just came back to pick up our stuff today. Nicole coldly told her father. You're going to be with that woman, right? Please do as you like. We're strangers now, so you should do what you want. I'm tired of being treated like a maid. From now on, I'm going to live my own life. With that, Nicole and I left Steve hanging his head and walked out of the house. Steve did not say anything back. It seemed he didn't have the energy to argue anymore. Tears seemed to be forming in Steve's eyes. Thus, Nicole and I started our new life, just the two of us in the high-rise condo. Later, I heard from the president about the aftermath of Steve and Kristen. They had a DNA test to determine the paternity of the unborn child. Steve insisted until the end that he was not the father, but the test results confirmed without a doubt that he was indeed the father. Having been abandoned by the president and facing divorce, Kristen tried to get Steve to recognize the child by showing up at his workplace, causing a commotion. Steve had intended to keep it hidden, but Kristen's arrival turned him into the talk of the company. Of course, this incident angered the president and nullified any business dealings with our company. Steve incurred the wrath of the upper management and was demoted to a subsidiary in the countryside. However, given his pride, Steve couldn't endure such treatment and ultimately resigned on his own accord. Now, he's reportedly job hopping, unable to hold down a new job. Having never really taken care of his parents, Steve apparently has a hard time at home without me. But now, there's no one around to help him. Meanwhile, Kristen moved to the countryside with her newborn and is reportedly making ends meet by working part-time at a produce market and living with her child. Since the divorce, the president has been working more vigorously than ever, as if to erase the past events. His efforts have led to a significant improvement in the company's performance. I am supporting the president more than ever, feeling like I've returned to the vibrant work days of my past. Nicole, wanting to continue playing basketball in college, is busily preparing for university exams while engaging in her club activities. Despite our busier lives, Nicole and I, bound by a deep bond, are enjoying our days together as a mother-daughter team.